We made it happen. Jimmy was an incredible success. I don't know where he is. I got to find him. Gosh, I don't. Oh.
Oh yeah, George. Oh, George.
Right
George.
here. Yeah.
We did it, brother.
Yes, we
hey,
did.
Thanks to Dan. You know what? And in the ring with Dan and Benny. Hey, brother, man, hey, he's about the most cat. I just love him to death. I love you. Thanks for having me. Hey, you're the best. I'm telling you, brother. In the ring with
Dan and Benny.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you so much.
Dan.
Mwah.
Oh yeah.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Spasciano, joined as always by the playa himself, Benny Scala. Benny, you kind of acted a little crooked towards me and got my title. How you doing?
Well, actually, Dan, I'm a little bit bummed out. I read something online. I read an expression, everything old is new again. And all week I've been looking in the mirror. I guess I'm the one exception because when I look in the mirror, all I see is old.
Oh, well, you know what? I made the joke at the top of the hour. You weren't old enough to be unscathed. You're a 5-time champ now, is it? 6-time champ.
6 times.
Well, I'm coming for you. Well, our friends at Monty and the Pharaoh, we had a good time last week. We had a great show with an unfortunate topic, and the wrestling world keeps taking from us. But we're back on track this week. We got some fun stories. We got some good times. Benny, why don't you tell everybody who the third face joining us this evening is?
Well, now on the flip side, our guest does have something new. It's a wonderful new book titled Macho Man, The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. And I'm very much looking forward to reading this, as well as many of the other great books that our guest has written. So without any further ado, let me welcome renowned author Jon Finkel to our show. Jon, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Thank you for having me, boys. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate the time. This should be great. Jon, we always start with the same question. It involves when the wrestling bug bit you. We want to find out when people became fans. But we're going to do things a little differently today because we were chatting before the show, and you sent me a message with an interesting link. So we're going to start the show with story time. I would really love for you to tell our fans the story you sent me about Little John and Big John Studd.
That's like I've been, when I started on the Macho Man journey, I was trying to figure out what you guys were of like how long have I been a fan of wrestling and of Macho Man and all this stuff. And so I live about 20 minutes from my parents, so I went and started to kind of go through the old photo albums. And like all of us, who grew up wrestling fans, you have like the bendy dolls and you have all this stuff. And then I had heard, I remembered obviously that I had met Big John Studd when I was little, but my mom had just a slew of pictures from this day where my dad used to work at Toys R Us and they had Big John Studd come for a grand opening. Now, I was always a Macho Man guy, even back then. But like all little kids, I was kind of immersed in the wrestling world and I called myself Little John Studd because my name's John. And so I actually got the opportunity to meet a Big John Studd and introduce myself, my mom says, proudly as Little John Studd. And so we met. He was amazing. And actually, in that story you referenced, we had all of the action figures. I brought Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy and, of course, Macho Man. And I think we had Junkyard Dog and a bunch of them. And he played with them and he had himself beating Hogan. And he really had a great time with us. And so the earliest true memory I have photos of is of that like particular moment where I met one of my wrestling heroes. And I think the amazing part about that is I had already, become a wrestling fan earlier than that. Cause I already from the years, the way they match up, it was probably like 6 or 7, age 6 or 7, I started getting really into it and then meeting him at age 8. And then from that point on, until as long as I can, till now, it was always been a part of my life.
You said he was a bit of a prolific eater in the story.
Oh my God!
You said like an 8-egg omelet and a loaf of French toast.
Yeah, it's funny as I've gotten older, all the stories are sort of just passed down. But in the photos from the day, I looked because my dad has always said my dad was a big guy. My dad's over 6 foot, for most of his life, well over 200 pounds, big eater. So he's not, and he was an adult then. He remembers way better than a kid, and he was like, it was crazy. He had like an 8-egg omelet, 4 pancakes, all the bacon on the table. I mean, he was a legitimate just giant. he was one of the first people as a kid that I remember seeing who dwarfed my dad. My dad was, like I said, 6'1", 220, something like that. So somebody who was that much bigger than my father, it was like eye-opening to me. And I remember I don't know where the doll is. He signed the back of it, and I played with it forever. My dad could tell me not to keep it, but obviously I smudged it off and wore it out. And like from that point on, it was just like a sort of next level fandom for me. You know, it was like now I know Big John Studd, so I have to be a bigger fan. But
Right.
but I remember telling me, my mom said that you were so proud of the Little John Studd thing, and then that I was, Macho was my guy.
Nice.
Yeah, I couldn't help but find it funny reading the article, because one of the pictures that I have from my childhood from many years ago, my father worked as an executive with Baskin Robbins, and they teamed up with Wild World, which I don't know if you're old enough to remember, the big amusement park in New Jersey. And I think it's a Six Flags now, but at the time their wave pool was the largest like amusement park pool ever, or in the world, or in the country, or whatever it was. But the Baskin Robbins and Coca-Cola teamed up, and they made a giant Coke float in the pool at
Nice.
Wild World, and Big John Studd was the celebrity guest, because this 7-foot dude holding a giant straw to stir who else is going to stir it?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I started thinking, I'm like, how many, because we've had a couple people in the past had mentioned, you lose sight of it today with social media, but wrestlers back then were celebrities. They would be at store openings and car commercials and things like the stuff that you'd see baseball and football and basketball players doing today. That was wrestlers on the TV. I just thought it was such a neat story when you sent me that. I was great stuff.
Yeah, and the line out the door, my dad said, it was a big attraction. It was a grand opening for a new store for them, and like you said, it wasn't like, oh, should we get so and so or Big John Studd? Like Big John Studd was the get. He wasn't like a backup or anything like that. Like It was huge, and I remember his hands. Like I will never forget. I've covered a million athletes since then, and it's hard as an adult to have that same impression. But I remember, which you do with all wrestling. Every wrestler probably has pictures of the kids doing like the high five thing.
Right.
I just remember my entire hand like barely made it through like the fat part of between his thumbs, like just the size of him. And then another fun thing with him, I remember my dad, he took off he had a ring. I don't know if it was a wedding ring or what, but he had a ring on one of his fingers, and they could put a quarter through it. My dad thought it was like the most amazing thing that his ring size was big enough to put a quarter through. Like, think about how big, like I have a pretty fat hands, and I could, it's not even a question. Like the guy was just a monster human being. So, but just that whole thing, being enamored with these guys and then meeting one of them.
Right.
And I went to a few shows. Like I said, I think I told you guys off air, I grew up in Boston. So we used to go to a few shows at the Worcester Centrum and the Garden around that time. So yeah, I was all in as you could be as an 8, 10,
Nice.
11, 12-year-old.
So, John, when did you decide that you had a penchant for journalism, that you wanted to make that your vocation?
It's funny. Journalism part, writing, yes. Journalism was something I almost always tried to avoid for a while. I'm not like a stickler. Like when I was in school, I had to take journalism classes and things like that. I really wanted to write. Like growing up, I read, I devoured Sports Illustrated for kids, and I devoured Sports Illustrated, and then all the other magazines that came out. We probably had 15, 20 magazines at the house, I think. Other than, becoming like a professional wrestler or playing left field for the Red Sox, I think if you'd asked me for most of my early life what I would have wanted to be, would have been like back page columnist for Sports Illustrated. That would have been it. Like, just give me Rick Riley's spot or maybe Steve Russian's spot in the front, and I'd be a happy man. And so that was originally what I thought I wanted to do. I just always read a ton of books. And then when I got to college, I realized that like columns and newspapers and all that stuff nobody leaves those jobs ever. And so like, I remember I had like a moment in college where I was like, man, it'd be so cool to be Bob Ryan. And then I was like, well, Bob Ryan was Bob Ryan when I was 8 and 18 and 28. Like,
right.
He's probably still going to be there. Like, I probably need to do books and do other things. And that's when I decided to go into magazines. And that's kind of where more of the journalism. Okay, so if I'm going to do these cover stories, and I didn't start off there, obviously, but once I got big enough to do cover stories and big features, the sources, the sourcing, the fact checking, all that stuff comes. But I definitely wanted to be a writer first, and then books first, and then I realized I wanted to build a career, and then that's where sort of the journalism stuff came in.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the normal follow-up to what Benny was asking would be your segue into professional wrestling journalism. But what you just said struck me, where you tried to avoid it and you started with the writing. And given your diverse body of work, I mean, Benny hit it on the head when he introduced you, just a diverse body of work. I kind of want to amend that and ask, like, you talked about the writing. What was the transition? I mean, was sports, I guess let me rephrase that. Was sports always what you were going to write about, or did that just come naturally because you wanted to write and sports is what you loved?
Actually, sports and fitness. So my break. So the first thing I started writing for was the NFL Players Association. I did a lot of like profiles on like where are they now. So this is back in the early 2000s, players who'd retired in the 70s and 80s and things like that. Bob Lilly and John Hanna, guys before my time, but what were they up to 20 years out of the NFL or 15 years out of the NFL? And I had realized back then, it's hard now to listen, but magazines were huge, right? Like they were the biggest things ever. Like as a writer to get your name as a byline or a cover story in a big magazine, as much of they've disappeared now, it was a big thing then. And so I just kind of looked at the magazines that I got, GQ, Men's Health, Men's Fitness. And I went to the library, even after going to college and not really understanding how you become a writer. I went to the library. I remember I took out like Writer's Digest and Writer's Weekly, like how to be a writer. And I started writing pitches, old pitches, like printing up a query letter inside a manila envelope with printed college stories that I'd written and stuff that I'd done freelance for like the Santa Monica Sun for 5 cents a word or whatever. And I started sending them to magazines. And the first magazine article that I got was for Men's Fitness. And it was an article on how to dunk a basketball. My intro was, I'm white, I'm 5'11", I've never dunked, but I'm going to learn how to do it for you guys. And I interviewed, like, the pitch got accepted, which is incredible. I was 1 for 1. And then I interviewed like the head strength and conditioning coach at UCLA, the flexibility mobility guy at USC, and I did the whole story. And so that was my in for fitness writing. And I ended up writing for Men's Fitness / Muscle and Fitness, that whole Joe Weider company, for 15 years on and off.
Wow.
So
Cool.
did you learn how to dunk?
I did. It was amazing.
Wow.
I was able to, this was the most absurd workout. Like I have like bricks in the pool, a lot of pool workout with weights, bricks, and then 10-pound jumps and all these explosive things in and out of the water. An insane amount of like load and volume for a lot of these things. And nothing special. It wasn't in a game. I went down and I could easily dunk a volleyball by that point. And then I got a couple, which is unbelievable. It felt amazing. I've always had big hands, so I always palm a ball. So I was able to get a few in. And then the first game that I played where I was able to do this, I pulled my quad because I was like so jacked up about trying to do it. And then I had to recover from it, and I was never able to, like, I had other things going on. I guess I never went all the way back there.
I'm sure Kevin Nash applauded you after you pulled your quad.
Very nice.
So Dan and I are very much looking forward to the release of that book about Macho Man. And, given the subject matter of your previous books, I'm curious why at this point you decided to write about a professional wrestler. Although, he's probably my favorite. Bruno Sammartino is my hero, but Randy Savage is right up there. So I'm really great. I'm very grateful that you made Randy the subject of your book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the path to Macho Man, for me, it makes total sense because I'm like, oh, this is what I want to do. But in order to write books, to me, I always felt like you have to have the confidence to do it. And then, the number one thing that you write when you write a proposal that an early agent told me a long time ago is there's a paragraph like why I'm perfect to write this book, right? Anybody could write certain books for people. So I had always wanted to write a Macho Man book. It was just in my head as a Macho Man fan. I could never believe that there wasn't one. It just over the years, there was not a Macho Man book, which always blew my mind. And so you had mentioned the other books that I'd written. The first book that I did was an autobiography of Nate Robinson, who was won 3 NBA dunk contests.
Okay.
He was Mr. Football, Mr. Basketball in the state of Washington and Seattle. And so I like guys who are one of ones, right? So like they kind of do things that no one's ever done. So Nate, 5'8", wins, first guy ever to win 3 dunk contests. Then I did a biography of Charlie Ward, first guy ever to win the Heisman Trophy, national championship, and then go on and play in the NBA and play
for the Knicks, right?
Yeah. Point guard, yeah, for the Knicks. So no one had ever done any of those things. I did an autobiography with Mean Joe Green, And then I did a biography of the team, the Seattle Supersonics, with Gary Payton and Isaiah Thomas and Sean Kemp and all those guys. And so I'd kind of looked at unique stories. And there's always, I think every writer probably has them, especially if you do biographies, man, wouldn't it be great to do this book? And I finally felt I had like the confidence and the ability, because they're not easy to do these books, the research and the interviews, and then all that kind of stuff to get through. And so I just decided, all right, no one's done this, and maybe there's a reason, maybe there's not, but it's time for me to put all the chips that I've had to the table of like the books that I've done, the credibility that I have, and so I was coming at this from, big names in the past. And then right before this book, the book that came out was a book called 1996, a biography. I did it, a biography of the sports year in 1996. And one of the reasons, wrestling-wise, why that year is important, because it's the debut of The Rock, as he was Rocky Maivia with the goofy hair and all that. And then also the debut of Steve Austin in the WWE. He was ringmaster.
Ringmaster, right.
But that was the year I always look at it as like before 1995 or 96, like the WWE, no one had heard of, I know Stunning Steve Austin and all that, but no one in the wider wrestling world had really heard of these guys. And I was looking at that, and I interviewed The Miz actually for that book, and we were talking about like the characters and all those kind of things. And he mentioned something about like how they're kind of descendants of the Macho Man. Like they both went different directions with their attitude and their charisma and how they were doing things, but ultimately like there'd been a break since then of that stuff. And I had the Macho Man just in my brain, like probably since I was 10 or 12. Like I want to write the Macho Man book. And then I finally got down to like, okay, I have a little time after the 96 book. I had some research done. I spent a couple of weeks just digging into his life and what would it look like and who would I have to talk to. And I was able to do it. And I'm like pumped. It was the most fun I've ever had writing a book.
You bring up a great point though, that you were surprised that nobody had written a book about him.
I couldn't, there's books where like, as I think nostalgia is a huge part of the kind of books that I write, especially early 80s, 90s nostalgia. And when you're looking at topics, there's some where you're like Iverson for a while didn't have a book, right? Like, and how does Allen Iverson not have a biography?
Right,
and
right.
Like, it's crazy, right? And there's one coming out finally of Ken Griffey Jr. And for years I was like, how has nobody tackled like Griffey, right? And there's always a reason. And for a little while I toyed with it, but I was not the guy to write that book. I really thought it had to be one of those national baseball writers who'd covered baseball for 30 years and knew his dad and could really get deep into the world of Griffey. But for some reason, no one had tackled Macho. And I found that with some wrestlers. All of a sudden, I know, Ric Flair just had, the biography just came out, that awesome book that Brian wrote, and some other guys wrote some good books about stuff. So like, I think as you go through and do all this stuff, you get really excited. I'm sorry, Tim wrote that book. Brian wrote the Sheik book. Right? Yeah, Tim Hornbaker wrote that book, and then Brian wrote the Sheik book. But I was kind of saying them out of order, but they've been coming out finally. There's, ECW has been a great job kind of being the place where these can have a home, and the great Honor the Giant book that came out a few years ago. And so I just thought it was time, and look, why not me, right? That whole, why not me? That's what I thought about. And then, for me, there was a couple different stipulations going into it, but that was mainly why.
Nice. Before we get back, because we want to talk more about obviously with Randy Savage and the book. I have to ask you, like we said at the top of the hour, you have such a diverse catalog of books. What inspired you to write Jocks in Chief? And for those unfamiliar, that's a book you wrote where you rank every president at the time based on their athletic prowess. You have categories, you go over everything. What brought that about?
It's like the Moneyball of president athletes. And just to be clear for everybody listening, there is not 1 ounce of politics in the book. The way I always describe it is it's zero politics, all sports. I don't mention a political party. There's nothing about that. I don't care about it. But the reason is I was writing for Muscle and Fitness magazine, like I mentioned earlier. And we used to have these themed issues, maybe 2 or 3 times. Like when you write for magazines, you have like your big buckets that you always go to. So every year we had an Arnold cover, obviously. We'd have a Bruce Lee cover in the summer because of his abs, and it was cool to have him talk about Enter the Dragon and all that stuff. And then we happened to be there for, I think it was in 2012, like an election year, and we never did anything. So I came up with this goofy idea of like, the tagline for the cover was red, white, and huge, like get your strongest ever, whatever. Yes. And I wanted to come on. it made me laugh to this day. You know, you see these writers' rooms and you just come up with these stupid ideas, and it got accepted like all the way to like the New York office. Like, oh, this would be actually be kind of fun. And so then you need like the supplementary content to go with that. And I was like, well, why don't I rank the most athletic presidents? Sounds like an easy thing to do, but this is really like pre like major internet being like used the way it is today, pre social media. I mean, stuff was up, but not as it is now. Anyway, so I researched this. I basically spent like 2 or 3 days in the library, old like newspaper archives, and I needed a system to come up with. So I ranked them, and I did a top 10 piece of the top 10 most athletic presidents, and it was really cool. And it took off. Like it was like I did a book. I was doing radio shows, like I was on all the local shows talking about it. It was like a very exciting time and article, and clearly I thought it was a book. So after the election was over, I think it was 2012, I went in and put a formal proposal together, and I hadn't done any books. I think I might have done the Nate Robinson book, just that book. And so I put a proposal together, and no one wanted anything to do with it. It was like, who's going to read this? And I'm like, everyone. I just went through, and they're like, yeah, well, it's done now. Like you did the top, like it's a magazine piece. It's not a feature. So I kind of just accepted that for a little bit. And then I got the Mean Joe Green book, and publishing became a little different, where with Amazon and some other things, you're able to put books out on your own. You know, you don't really, I mean, publishing is great, and I love my publisher, especially ECW with Macho, but in between the big books that I've done with the traditional publishers, I've kind of just put out little passion projects myself. So I hired a cover designer and an editor, and I went to work as if it was a major, mainstream book. I came up with the criteria, ranked it, and then put it out. And it went like I thought it would. Like it got picked up in the New York Post, and CBS this morning flew me to New York to talk about, Hillary and Trump and their athleticism. It blew up, and to this day it sells thousands of copies. And I update it every 4 years because there's an election every 4 years, so I actually have to do a new one because part of the rankings are how athletic the president was in office. Although Biden, I'm not gonna have two. He's not been super athletic the last 4 years, I don't think. So I don't know. I'm not gonna have too much to add to that because he's not in the last one.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it came about.
For fun little tidbit. Actually, I've kind of a quick follow-up, but a fun little tidbit from an article that is now 12 years old. In your original article, for our listeners out there, the most athletic president as of 2012 was Gerald Ford, which would make sense considering he was a damn near Hall of Fame college football athlete. So,
yeah.
Although as a wrestling fan, I can't help but point that Abraham Lincoln invented the choke slam. He's credited with that.
Abraham Lincoln, yeah, he's up there. Washington is up there. Abraham Lincoln actually had, I can't remember the number, but it was it's like 200 and in that catch can wrestling that they used to do back then. Mm-hmm. He was a street fighter. I heavily weighted actual competition, so that's why some of the more modern guys who have real accomplishments, like you mentioned, right. Ford, actually playing. He was a boxer. Ford was a terrific athlete. George H.W. Bush was a first baseman on the Yale baseball team, mm-hmm. An exceptional athlete later into his life. And so, that's where, again, that's why politics doesn't, people look at this. And right. That was the one downside is,
it's actually funny. The only phenomenally reviewed book, by the way, on Amazon, if you look it up, your Jocks in Chief, you have one star review, and it's somebody complaining that there's no politics in the book. Like this is
is that true? I didn't know that.
It doesn't go into the real presidents. Like that's clearly you talk about the near miss the point. But I am curious, just quick follow up. When you ranked Grover Cleveland, did you rank him twice on two separate occasions? Because he was in different shape 4 years apart, right?
Different shape, yeah. No, I kept it. He was like a fighter growing up. Like some of these guys, especially back in the 1800s, they had real rough childhoods. I mean, they were really, really not growing up playing Little League. So I had to kind of like find things that would make them, somewhat modern. Like, for like someone like Ulysses S. Grant or whatever, like, he was widely known as the best horseback rider in all of the United States at the time, both during the United States and the Confederate War, everything. West Point, he was considered the greatest horse rider the university had ever had, and so that stuff has to count versus like Obama's 8th grade basketball team or some of the more modern presidents doing things. So I had to come up with fun ways to weight it. But yeah, it was a blast doing it. And like I said, every 4 years I revisit it and put out a new edition. I had Trump last time and then Obama the second time, all that stuff. So I just add all the new people, and it's a fun little like 4 year project to own.
I'm just curious, like, how did you find out anything about somebody like a Martin Van Buren?
First, their presidential libraries are very helpful. There is I'm going to blank out on it. There's a team over the years. It's not virginia.pres.gov, but it's one of those groups that I found on Reddit. And this is what they do. They just they just curate all the information about all the presidents, any article that you can find. And then also, if you look at a lot of like some of those guys like Van Buren and James Polk, some of them don't have like big biographies about them, but all the scandals and all the things that happened during that era mention these guys all the time, right? And so some of that no-name list of presidents, who served 4 years and disappeared. I'm not pretending that we found like in-depth research on, whether they could jog an 8-minute mile or something. So like I said, it's a tongue-in-cheek book. The top 15 or so, though, like when you get to the real rankings, there's real athletic ability in real things. It's just some of those lower ones. There's not a whole lot there.
Nice. Interesting. So, John, the dedication of the Macho Man book, it simply says for Lanny, and I think we're all in disbelief that Lanny's no longer with us. Were you able to work with him at all before his untimely death? And if so, please tell us about your experience with him and what he was able to add to the book.
Yeah, I did get to work with him. So when I was telling you earlier about writing the book, when I finally put the proposal together, I had one thought like overriding in my head, which is like, I know Macho Man had passed away, his dad, mom, everybody was gone, but Lanny was still around. And I couldn't imagine doing the book without talking to Lanny, because my number one thought was like the number one wealth of information and kind of torchbearer for the Popo family is Lanny. And B, like if down the line I don't talk to him, the book comes out and you guys right now ask me that question and I'm like, I couldn't get a hold of him. I feel like it would just diminish the whole thing, especially if he was still alive, right? I mean, it'd be like, what? Like, how do you write the Macho Man book without talking to Lanny? So I had the proposal. I had a couple people interested in it, but I had not been able to get a hold of him. And so funny enough, I had interviewed JP for the 96 book, and I just happened to do some research, find out that he and Lanny had done like a couple podcasts together and he'd helped them on the pro wrestling site. And so I just reached out through a DM. I was like, hey man, I really want to do this book, but I do not want to do it without Lanny. And it took like a year, and this is not JP's fault, just Lanny's was a mysterious fellow to get a hold of.
He is hard to get in touch with. He lived
in Ecuador. He didn't use a phone. I had to use like Facebook. I don't even know what it was called. Some offshoot Facebook communication thing that I'd never had to install just to talk to him. But it took about a year. I'd emailed him a bunch. I had written a bunch of messages like, hey, I really want to do this book. Here's my vision for it. Here's why I want to talk to you specifically. And then finally we got in touch. And he just like instantly, first thing he said was asked if I was related to Howard Finkel. And I was like, no, because he was like, if you're related to Howard Finkel, I'd be involved on the spot or whatever. And I was like, no. I made some joke. My dad's name's Harvey, so HF, the same initials, like close enough, I guess, And then he really went into just like grill mode of like what I knew about Randy and what I wanted to do with the book and what my plan was and what I talked about. And I must have passed because we talked for like 2 or 3 hours after, and he answered every possible question that I could have and that I could list. And so what I ended up doing was I kept a list of like questions next to my desk called remaining questions. And anytime that I kind of talked to him, I would write it down and message him. And then unfortunately, that list, like right next to me, I found out that he passed away midway through the book.
That was a shocker when I mean, he had posted something, I think, the night before. He was actually in New York, and I think he had a very nice looking young lady, and I think he was taking in a Broadway show. And then I got a voice message from JP the next morning, and he said, Lanny's dead. I was like, I knew JP wouldn't joke around about anything like that. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah,
just unbelievable.
It was tough. I don't pretend to know him more than, I talked to him a couple times and had some Facebook exchanges, which half were unanswered just because of the way it was, but he was on board with me doing it, as we talked. And JP really went out on a limb, kind of vouched for me in the old way of vouching for someone, like, here's his books, here's what he can do, here's how his vision for it. He's a true blue fan, but he's also going to treat it fairly, which is what my plan was from the beginning. And And, you know, I guess I'd always had this vision of like, I don't know, I didn't know Lane. I never met him in person, even though we talked a lot in the beginning of the writing of the book. But I'd always had this like awesome moment of like maybe finding a way to be together to open it with him, or I knew it was coming out WrestleMania. Maybe he would possibly be there and we could talk. And it was just cut short. Thankfully, like I said, I had the section I wrote it sort of chronologically. So I kind of had a lot of what I wanted to talk to him about done. I mean, I have, you know, it's probably 10 or 12 page transcript. But it sucked. And I think he took such pride in not only, you know, Randy, but also Angelo and Judy and what they did at ICW and what they did, you know, and even Randy's baseball career. He had a sense of pride and joy with what Randy was able to accomplish and the legacy that they both had as a family. And yeah, it sucks that he isn't going to get to see it, but I hope in some way people who knew him, you know, will see his fingerprints all over the book, and really this kind of can be the coda to, you know, the Poffo family's, you know, most famous wrestler.
You know, you mentioned about the baseball career. He was actually a very good ball player.
Yeah, that was actually, so, you know, like you guys, I grew up being a fan of his. So anytime an article came out, I would read it. And then when he passed away, a lot of baseball content came up about him. So I learned a lot about that. But I knew, you know, all the wrestlers interviewed, you know, were talking about his legacy and all those things. So I went down the rabbit hole of Randy several times without writing the book and knew a lot of stuff. But when I really got into his baseball career, specifically how dedicated he was in middle school and high school, and I talked to almost his entire high school team. I talked to a ton of his minor league teammates, coaches. He was 100% on, like, dead target, as intense as Randy could be, as he was later in life, focused on baseball. And everybody you talk to was also like certain that he was going to be a Major League Baseball player. I mean, he was the best player on every team he ever played on until he got to the minors, and then he didn't get drafted, which is one of my toughest but fun sections to write in the book, because it was like, you can see how it happens, you know, now even with kids, you know, trying to get a spot on a college team or get drafted. Like, the heartbreak was just amazing, and then how he battled back to finally make his way in the minors is awesome.
Excuse me. You know, John, the years Benny and I have been doing this, we've had numerous writers on the show. We've asked this before, but I think it bears repeating, because the way you were explaining the history of your career, besides numerous books, you've written a number of short pieces, magazines, websites. You were talking about the annual sections in the magazines you wrote for. When you're talking about a book versus a magazine article, is this the equivalent of like a sprint versus a marathon? I mean, what are the respective disciplines for writing each?
Well, the delayed gratification is the biggest thing. Like, so I come from the magazine world where, like, I started out in newspaper, so that's pretty simple, right? You write an article on Tuesday, it could come out Wednesday. Like, you're on it. Like, whatever you're writing, people are going to see it. And any writer who says that they don't care about their byline or people reading their stuff, like, what are you doing it for? The whole point is for as many people to read what you're writing as possible. There's ego. It's awesome seeing your name in print. It's awesome having people tell you they loved your article or story or book or whatever. So that's just honestly how it is. And then, you know, in magazines, I'd be writing a cover story on, I did a bunch of wrestlers. I did Batista cover story, did a big cover story on Triple H, did cover stories on, you know, Frank Mir, Brock Lesnar, Randy Couture, all these guys. And so, you know, that at least is maybe only like a 6 week to 2 month lag. So, like, you know, I spent a week up training with Randy Couture and Brock Lesnar before they fought in the UFC, and writing about that for a cover story. And, you know, that came out 6 weeks later. So by the time I really finished writing it, we got it down, we got the pictures down, it was out. So there wasn't too much of a rush of like, oh, it's finally coming. The hardest part and the biggest difference for books is you can obviously, you know, compound the work. The volume is just as what it is versus, you know, a 3,000 word article versus a 100,000 word book. You can just kind of extrapolate the time and energy and effort. It's the idea that in this particular case that you have the idea in probably February of 2021, you finally get the proposal out and get everybody going and sign the contract or write it in, like, I can't remember, September of 22. And now here we are, you know, in April of 24, and it's finally coming out and people are finally able to, you know, see it and read it. And to me, that's the hardest part. So from a marathon to a sprint perspective, effort wise, that's probably an accurate description of just the work side of it. but because but not even the actual competing of it, it would be, and I do triathlons, so this is like right in my wheelhouse of thinking like, oh, okay, it's more of the work put in, right? Like the marathon itself is the end result of all those logged miles. And that's kind of what a book is. It's like the book that you hold is the end result of hundreds of stringing together, hundreds and hundreds of 1,000, 2,000, 300 word writing days, rewriting, editing, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a pretty good analogy. The difference is, to me, is like, even when you're running a marathon, that you run the marathon that day and you're going to finish that marathon. It'd be like saying you're going to run a marathon 2 years from now, and then you're just waiting to do that marathon.
Right.
You know?
Gotcha. You know, John, Dan and I always say that we're actually a baseball podcast hiding under the cloak of professional wrestling. This is our 167th episode, and I would have to say that there's a baseball reference in each. And actually, we've already made one or two. But, you know, with all the great books you've written, why haven't you done one on the national pastime?
Well, no one's going to pay me to write the Mike Greenwell biography, despite my efforts, which I've tried many times.
I'd buy a Yaz book.
I got a hold of his son. I've got a hold of his family. He runs like this huge construction company now in Fort Myers. That's the one I've wanted to write. I just found it, you know, I remember as a kid growing up in Boston, for those who may not know, probably don't, Greenwell made the All-Star team 2 or 3 times. Like, he was the left fielder heir apparent after Jim Rice. He was a bona fide star for a couple of years. And he was known for 3 things. A, being a great left fielder. He led the league, I think, in game-winning RBI a few times, and coming second in MVP to Canseco the year Canseco basically admitted to using steroids. But he also, for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old growing up at that time, wrestled alligators as a hobby and also raced cars. So
wow.
for like a 10, 12-year-old kid who's looking up at somebody in Boston, not only left field for the Red Sox, who wrestles gators and races cars, it's a hard bucket to beat of coolness, right? And so I always wanted to write his book, and I don't think it'd be a mainstream giant book; it'd be a localized thing. But the other answer to that is in my book 1996, which I'd mentioned. I talk a lot of baseball. I have a whole chapter on Griffey, his diving, his catch. I have a whole story on why he wears his hat backwards, which is a fascinating story in there that I did research on. So I think there's 3 baseball chapters in that book. There's that one. I think there's a chapter on the Yankees, because that was the first, 96 was the first year that the Jeter, his rookie year, and they came in and won the World Series that year. I believe there's another baseball chapter in there somewhere. So I've tackled it chapter-wise, but Mike Greenwell is my macho version of baseball, and thus far I have not been able to do it.
So wait, did Greenwell actually wrestle alligators like off-season while he was playing ball?
Yes. His nickname's Gator Greenwell. I have in my garage right now his Costa Coast brother. Remember those Costa Coast brothers posters? Is Gator Greenwell, and he's standing there with a bat over an alligator. And he used to, he grew up in the sticks and used to know how to actually wrestle alligators like they do at, alligator shows here in Florida, like at the Everglades and stuff like that.
I'm wondering if the Red Sox knew about that.
They did. I found articles about it in the Globe. Like Shaughnessy, they would write about, they called him Gator Greenwell for that. And then the other thing was when he finished baseball, he played Japan for a little bit. And then he raced cars. He tried to be like a stock car racer for a few. He's a fascinating guy. And then he ran a putt mini golf place here in Florida. I'm telling you, I did the research and I knew it would be maybe 500 people in Boston would buy this thing, but maybe not. So anyway, now it's there's the business side of I'm not going to write a 100,000 word Mike Greenwell book that 200.
Maybe he had an incentive in his contract, $100,000 if you don't get your arm bitten off by an alligator.
Yeah, he was really, really good. I think he was really, really good. I think it's one of those guys where locally people would care. That book's not going anywhere nationally, but that was the one that I've always thought of. I guess I mentioned earlier, Griffey. I love Griffey. Everybody loved Griffey. I'm not the guy to write that book. And then, that's really Nomar doesn't have a book. I'm obviously looking Boston wise, but there's no signature moment. He didn't win a World Series or anything like that. So I think baseball of all the sports would probably be, I think, the hardest. I love, Jane Levy's books on Sandy Koufax and on Mickey Mantle is incredible. Howard Bryant, I think, did an amazing, I think he did Hank Aaron's biography is incredible. There's so many. Lee Montville's books on Ted Williams. I've read a million of them. I love them all. Jeff Pearlman's book on Bo Jackson, which was half football, half baseball, is incredible. I think just baseball stats in a book are very hard to keep going over the time frame. So I have that would it. My guy would be Greenwell, but other than that, Pedro would be amazing. But again, I think that has to be someone who had access to the clubhouse and stuff all throughout that time. Baseball is so long and there's so many games and so many moments. I just think it'd be very difficult to jump in now, having not lived through it and having a relationship with that person.
Right.
So sometimes, the dream project or whatever, like I would not do a great job on that because I'd be playing catch up.
That's fair. I mean, Benny's he's a Yankees fan. He'll tell you if you want to write an interesting baseball book, you could interview Yankees fans and see how many pages you get through before someone yells 27 rings at you. Probably be a pretty short story.
Oh my God, it'd be about 7 words in.
On the introduction, probably.
Yeah. I actually, someone in the coffee shop when I start writing would shout at me 27 rings.
Well, it'd be reaction to seeing your Red Sox hats.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm surprised that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm surprised nobody's written a book about Denora, Pennsylvania, because, 2 of the greatest ball players of all time came from this little tiny town.
Who's that?
Stan Musial and Griffey.
Oh, right. I've heard about that. Yeah. Griffey, I did the research on Griffey. Like basically my chapter in 1996 is a mini biography of Griffey. Like I talk about how he was an incredible high school football player and was recruited by Michigan and would have been on the Michigan team with Desmond Howard. Elvis Gerback would have been dropping back to throw to Griffey and Desmond Howard had Griffey decided to play football.
Wow.
What a combination.
Yeah, that would have been something. So like I said, I did it. I did enough. I was kind of satisfied my Griffey, wanting to write it in that chapter. I think I could do a pretty good job on his cultural relevance and all that fun stuff, but the day in, day out, all the years in Seattle, all the years in Cincinnati, that has to be a national baseball writer. I don't think I would do that justice at all.
That's fair. Circling back to the bit of wrestling, I know this issue's kind of been chatted at ad nauseum in the last few weeks, but your latest book is about a WWE superstar. Randy Savage, by all accounts, had a fairly close relationship with Vince McMahon. I'm just curious, if you had any thoughts on the recent scandal.
I don't. Savage, they were super close until they weren't, and then they never spoke again.
Right.
Like that was it, and they were done. And there's rumors. There's some really nasty rumors. There's some like untoward rumors as to why. There's unfounded, and I found a lot. And there's just like you mentioned the journalism, Betty, like there was just nothing to support anything. So I didn't want to be like, it could be this, it could be that. We don't know why. And then throw things, especially when it's in a book and it's forever. So I kind of just, that was one area where I could not find concrete. It was just rumor. Everything was a rumor about a rumor or somebody confirming what they thought was possibly true, which in journalism doesn't stand for anything. So that was kind of their relationship just ended. And the last thing was, when Vince kind of gave his quick little, you notice that Randy's not in the booth tonight, Godspeed, whatever. As far as the stuff about, with him now, I mean, I know probably what you guys know, just people writing on Twitter and reporting. It's not good. It sounds pretty horrible. And I know there's a lot of people, it puts him in a weird spot because he's made a lot of careers and made a lot of money with people. And there's a lot of different sides to people, but it sounds really bad. And if true, whatever he is guilty of, he should be punished for,
I think a lot of people use the allegations, with him and Stephanie, the rumors as to why Vince didn't bring him back, after WCW folded. But I mean, I really think that's a stretch.
It could be, Lanny told me this wasn't specifically to Vince at all. But he said that like Randy had an FU list that he kept in the tabs of his head a mile long. And once you were on it, even if you were someone like Vince or Hulk Hogan, you were on it until you weren't. And they had a nice, he had a nice reconciliation with Hulk Hogan by happenstance towards the end of his life, which worked. But until then, they had gone, I think, over a decade
years
without any,
Mm-hmm.
And so, at the very end of his life, he did have that promo that we've all seen online where he was, coming back with the video game and he showed up all, doing the whole thing with his beard. So who knows, but no one's come out. Obviously I did not talk to Vince for this book. So I don't know. I don't know any more than anybody else knows, but it doesn't sound good. The Brock stuff doesn't sound good. It sucks because, I was reading what Becky Lynch said and it's like, people can have one experience. And she said, she's like, this is my experience. It doesn't mean anything, but I can only answer to my experience. And it's been great. It's made my life and my career and everything. But at the same time, on the same parallel train track, all these horrible, awful things could have happened, and that should be spoken for.
Well, quick follow-up as you're talking about that, because, you know, before we start getting towards the end, you were talking about the Randy Savage hit list and all. I'm genuinely curious, because you mentioned Hulk Hogan, and he did have some beef, and he had some thoughts later in life. If you have any thoughts on Randy Savage's rap album.
Oh, I did a nice deep dive on Randy's rap album in the book. You know, that was one of the reasons that I'm glad I did get to talk to Lanny about it. If you when you read the book, and you'll learn a lot more about him when you read it, but you'll learn more about like what made him tick. He didn't do anything, that phrase, like he didn't do anything half-assed. Like when he put the album out, he genuinely believed like he was going to have a hit rap album. And the producers he was working with believed it, and he premiered at like the MTV, like a pre-show for the MTV Video Awards. Look, it's not good. He's not bad. It's one of those
I've heard
things.
Worse.
Well, for a 50-year-old guy with a gravelly voice, he's not like an MC. No one's going to be like, oh, is that Randy Savage or Biggie? I don't know. It's so close, But what I will say is he put his heart and soul into it, and he believed it was going to be a success. He really thought he was going to sell a lot of copies, even though Lanny was basically like, what the hell are you doing? But look, Randy was a creature of invention and reinvention his whole life. And I'm pretty sure he was able to think to himself, why not win a Grammy as a rapper? I've done anything, I wanted to play baseball. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. He wanted to be in movies. Like, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, all punchlines aside, he had a song on that album, well, track, I guess is the more appropriate word, on that album about Mr. Perfect that was legitimately very good.
Well, that was written by Lanny. So he originally
was it really?
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh
he
God,
had
I didn't know
asked
that.
Lanny.
Yeah.
He had originally asked Lanny to write a diss track against Hulk Hogan on the album, and Lanny had a standing rule to never talk bad about Hogan, because for about 2 weeks in 1980, whatever, he had a little run with Hogan, a little program where it was like the most famous, most on top Leaping Lanny Poffo ever was in the WWE.
Oh yeah.
And he owed it all to Hogan. Hogan allowed him to do it. Hogan was he wasn't rolling over for anybody.
Yeah,
and so he decided, he said, I won't do that, but here's what I will do. Let's do a song about our friend Kurt Hennig.
Yeah, we mentioned it on the show a few times. Lanny actually has now granted it was count out, but he has a clean win over Hogan in an era when that just never happened.
Never happened. Yeah.
Never. And he said, my brother's issue with Hogan was my brother's issue with him. He crossed paths with Hulk far more later in their lives than obviously the Macho ever did, just because Lanny was on the circuit, that was his kind of livelihood and stuff. And he said, I would never say a bad word about him. He gave me the best moments of my career out there. So I always respected Lanny for that when I learned that he, that's an easy thing. But one of the things the brief moments I got to know Lanny was he was a principled guy, and he was a fun guy. And even that was something he wasn't going to do for his beloved brother.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, John, amongst your many diverse books is one called, and this one really caught my attention. It's called The Dadvantage: The Fitness Plan for New Fathers. And I have 3 adult children now, and I've been a regular at the gym since 1988. So I was very curious about this one. If you could tell our listeners a bit more about it, and again, what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, that one is a different one that I put out. It started out as just an ebook, actually. My daughter being born back in 2011 started it. I'm a big lifter my whole life. I love the gym, swimming, volleyball, ocean swims. Like, I'm super active. And then you have your kid, your first child, and it's like you're tired all the time, and you just want to eat crap all the time. And if you don't work out in the morning, it just always gets pushed back. You go to work tired, so you're working slower.
Tired, yeah.
You're going to try to work out at lunch, and then the meeting shows up, or you just don't have the energy to do it. And then, I'll do it later on in the afternoon. and that doesn't happen. And then you decide, oh, I'll do it after dinner and when everybody's asleep. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I'm going to be up at the feeding, or I'm going to be up because of the crying, or who knows what. And so you just kind of put it off. And so the advantage was this idea that like, it's like, stay in shape with no time, no sleep, and no equipment, right? So it was basically like, here's a bunch, I call them micro workouts. Like, it's just, here's stuff to do throughout the day just to stay in shape for this 3 to 5 month period when you're adjusting to being a dad, when your kid's not sleeping, when maybe they have colic or night terrors or whatever they have going on. It's kind of a bridge to get you back to when your normal life, when you're adjusted to be a dad. So there's, all kinds of like push-ups and pull-ups and sprints when you're walking the, intervals when you're walking the stroller, just a bunch of ideas. And I put that together and put it out, I think right after she was born. And I actually I was going to put it out for free as like just a lead magnet basically for things. And I put it on Amazon for like, I think it's $4.99. I mean, it has been forever, but I've given it free too over the years as like a giveaway. And thing sells. It sells like 20 copies a month all the time. It's hilarious. Wow. It's just 10 years, just keeps going and going and going and going. It's timeless. It's easy. The whole thing's maybe 40 pages. And it's funny. Well, you had mentioned earlier, like somebody made an Amazon remark about a review. I remember when I first put it out, I think when I put it out, it was $2.99. It was very, very expensive. And I even wrote in there, like when I posted it, like if anybody can't afford $3, you can have this. It's just a fun thing to write. And somebody wrote a review like, biggest waste of money ever. Like, what a money grab. And I was like, it's $3. It can't be a money grab. What do you mean?
Well, that's clearly the threshold. If it was $2, that guy would have been cool.
That was one of the only things, and I don't read a ton of them. I'm not going to lie and say I don't at all. I don't check regularly on reviews and all that. But that was one of my first or second books out there, so I was following it a little closer. And I remember reading that, and I actually wrote the person, and I was like, "Are you serious? Like, that's your problem with the book? Not that it's whatever it is, but like it's the $3. It's a money grab. How much money do you think I'm making on this book?"
Well, it's funny. You always got to look. With the tagline on our show is we celebrate. Look forward to wrestling's future and celebrating its storied past. We've had so many writers on the show, and a lot of them have written about the old territory wrestlers. Keith Elliott Greenberg with, Flair and Freddie Blassie. Ian Douglas wrote about Bugsy McGraw and Steve Kern, who Steve Kern himself told the stories on our 150th episode. I mean, these stories, the books, they tell the stories about these wrestlers making their way through the territories, the late nights. And, Randy, it was one of those. The Poffos had a territory. He grew up in the territories, with state of wrestling as it is today. 20 years from now, when someone's writing a book on Becky Lynch or Seth Rollins, I mean, how compelling is that story when you have people who spend sometimes years of their lives in the same city in front of the NXT crowd, or maybe you wrestle 3 times a month if you're lucky?
Yeah, I think that I thought about that a lot. My son's 11, diehard wrestling fan, watches SmackDown with me, watches, not so much Raw just because Monday's hard with kids and homework, and the first night it's 3 hours. So, but Raw, we watch every SmackDown, and we're up to speed and all this stuff, and he's into it. I've taken him to some house shows when they come down here in Florida. To me, the biggest obstacle is the social media side, right? So like Seth or Becky or any of them who post, LA Knights are one of our favorites here. Like, when you look at their rise, it's a real time, right? So like if you're somewhat interested in any of these people 20 years from now, a simple YouTube search can pretty much catch you up to everything. And not that that's like a documentary where, like, I wouldn't say a Macho documentary or, versus a book, or a 30 years from now, Seth Rollins or John Cena versus, a book. But so much of it is already on the record that the research for it is just going to be an endless amount of their Instagram page and their YouTube page and the interviews that they have that you may want to do for someone like that almost already sort of exist. Like the biggest part of these books is the context of the time. What was going on, what was happening. I do a lot of that in Macho, of juxtaposing how big wrestling was. Saturday night main event outrated everything but the Super Bowl, right? Like it was monstrous when Hulk, when they set up the WrestleMania with Hulk and Andre the Giant, when they set up Macho going on these things, when the Mega Powers exploded, all these things. These were 10, 12 Nielsen ratings. These were monsters. These beat every NBA game. They beat every NHL game other than NFL playoffs. Back then, baseball was bigger, so the World Series was still mattered, but it beat all regular season playoff games. It beat Dallas, a TV show. Like it was huge. And so I just wonder, with this age of everything being available and streaming and all this stuff, when I write about, what WrestleMania 3, and we write about, Macho WrestleMania 6 and 7, it was a shared event, unlike it is today, where it's streaming. Maybe you watch it later. Maybe you follow some of it on Twitter. Maybe you follow some of it on whatever it is. So to me, the obstacle would be the inundation of information during their careers, which did not exist. Randy did not post every day, all day about being Randy. Even The Rock, what he's doing now, which is awesome, the Hollywood Rock, everything back with that. He's on Instagram all the time, back and forth between promoting, Zoa, and then being the bad guy, and then going to make someone's day with Make-A-Wish. Like, it wasn't that way. Like, you only saw Randy on TV when he was being on TV, Randy Savage. Obviously, he was his character 24/7, but you saw Hulk Hogan in the movies or on TV or on wrestling, and like maybe a commercial. So that would be my thought, is I'd be curious, and maybe there'll be somebody that I would want to do that with, write a book on down the line. But I think it would be a different writing process. And I think for the people who grew up following that person, if you are a giant Seth Rollins fan, like you mentioned, and you're following him on his social accounts, you'll know all this stuff. It's going to be very hard to find things that you were not aware of. And that, to me, is maybe a hurdle. By no means no reason not to write it. Somebody probably could come up with a brilliant angle of how to do it. But the reason those territories are so fascinating is because they were largely in obscurity for a vast majority of the wrestling audience. And now as a writer, you get to bring them to life, which is awesome.
Absolutely. So, John, a little bit of self-promotion. If you could, let our listeners know how to reach you on social media, and also any information on any of your future projects.
Yeah, I can't mention yet the next book, but you're going to love it, I promise. And so that was several months down the line. I'll reveal that. But you can follow, the best place for everything for me is jonfinkel.com, JONFINKEL.com. I write a newsletter called Books and Biceps. It has over 10,000 readers. I do a ton of author Q&As. I basically recommend a book every week and workout motivation and stuff. So I've interviewed a lot of the authors that you guys have mentioned for their books, Ric Flair's book and Sheik's book, and I have a couple others coming up in the wrestling world as well. But I recommend books all the time, and so sign up for that if you want like regular updates on Macho Man, on other books that I'm writing, on columns like you mentioned, the Big John Stud column and things like that. That's the best place to get like regular information from me. And then I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Jon_Finkel. Follow those two. But the newsletter is the place where the algorithm will not keep us apart. So that's where you should join.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, the excuse me. Like you said, the website is jonfinkel.com. Obviously, we talked about it earlier. John, you have an author page on Amazon, Jocks in Chief, The Life of Dad, all the books we've talked about. Your Joe Green, obviously that's where April 2nd. Am I correct in that? April
Macho
2nd?
Man comes out April 2nd. Yeah, WrestleMania week,
Nice.
and I'll be up there. So we got a lot of stuff scheduled, some book signings and things. So that's why I was saying join the newsletter. I can give you updates on everything going on there as well.
Well, that answers actually just about to ask that if you had any book signings coming up with all the crowds that are going to be out WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, we'll do. We got something at a Barnes & Noble and another local store, and then there's a bunch of podcasts that'll be around that. So we will. Can't have a Macho Man book coming out at WrestleMania and not be at WrestleMania.
No, that's fair. And like you said, book's called Macho Man: The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. Amazon and booksellers, and like you said, keep an ear out. JonFinkel.com. All your public appearances. Benny, final thoughts to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad we got to interview John. And there's somebody. I mean, I love Macho Man, and I can't wait till this book comes out because it's going to definitely be like my number one read.
Yeah, well, let me know what you think as soon as you guys finish, and I'll send you guys. I got these cool hologram stickers with a cover and signed book plates, so I'll get that off to you.
All right, nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can a little spot. I see all you stuff you have in there. You have a nice little spot for little Macho Man stickers.
There you go. Betty and I both have extensive wrestling libraries, and we were talking about this book, so we're looking forward to it. So for the player himself, Benny Scala, for Jon Finkel, jonfinkel.com, and Amazon. For all your wonderful reading needs, I'm Dan Sebastiano. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.